Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. If you're new to this channel, this is a channel where we explore the subjects of healing childhood trauma, C-PTSD, I can never say that properly, and all the various subjects kind of in between. So if you like that kind of content, please click on the like and subscribe. I put out videos pretty much every week. If you're not new to this channel, thank you very much for coming back. Now, the subject of today's video is a subject that's very kind of dear to my heart, as are all the subjects here, but this one in particular. And it's to do with addiction and childhood trauma. And it's particularly to me because addiction has been something I've mentioned here and there on videos, but it is something that I've really struggled with, and it's been very much how up until a certain point I dealt with my trauma, even I wasn't necessarily conscious with it. And what I'd like to share with you today is one insight that really came from Gabor Maté initially that has fundamentally changed how I view my addiction and how I have dealt with my addiction, to the point where I would describe it as a kind of like a cornerstone insight or a cornerstone understanding that's helped frame my recovery and my long-term sobriety. And I would like to share with you today what that insight is and how that came about. But before I get to that, I'd like to also take you through the evolution of how I arrived at that, because it wasn't my first port of call. I went through two other phases before I got to this third and sort of last understanding that had their own issues, and I see it as very much as an evolution. But what I'd like to share with you is where I started in my addiction process, what did or didn't work, and how I arrived at this particular conclusion. So, yeah, I think it's important also to understand that the way we understand something, the way we view something, shapes how we approach something. If you think the world is flat and at the edge of the sea it drops off, how far you sail, what you do, where you do or don't go is going to, that's going to have a bearing on that fear that I'm going to drop off the edge of the earth. If you suddenly discover the world is round, what you can and can't do, where you sail, where you don't, is then influenced by that. And it's very much the same with mental illness and addiction. The way we look at it, the frame of reference, will shape how we approach and what we do. So in my addiction story, I won't give you all the boring details of what got me to that point, but I was drinking very heavily, and like a lot of addicts, I had a period of time where I was drinking sort of heavily and regularly, but not daily. And then I got to a certain point where I was drinking daily, I was drinking in the mornings, I was hiding it, and yes, it went from being problematic to a problem. And somewhere in that, I thought, okay, I got to stop drinking. This is terrible, this is bad. And my first understanding was the reason I drank were two things. I'm selfish and I'm weak-willed. That's my problem. And if I can just be less selfish and less weak-willed, then I can conquer this issue of drinking and just get back on with my life. And that didn't succeed very well. I'd go X amount of months or weeks or days at times, and I would revert, which would just confirm my theory that the reason I relapsed is because I was weak and I was selfish, and I needed to be strong and more caring about others, about the effect I was having on other people. So I tried that for a couple of years, pretty unsuccessfully. In recovery, they call that white knuckling. It just didn't work. And then I went into a 12-step program, an AA program, and that was definitely an improvement. So I went from feeling my addiction issue was a character issue, a flaw of my character, a failing, to suddenly understanding addiction within the model of a disease. And in AA, they consider alcoholism to be a disease that is incurable, but it can be arrested. And it's a disease of mental obsession, physical compulsion, and spiritual malady. And the way you arrest it and kind of keep it at bay is through going to meetings regularly, getting a sponsor, and doing the steps. And more or less you're expected to do that for the rest of your life. And obviously as you get to a point where you're better with it, you then pass that on and help others, to get to where you've got to, that kind of thing. And that did work for a period of time. It was definitely better than this kind of like whip of self-hatred, but that felt like there was something missing. I was still relapsing. I'd moved on from alcohol to opioids, and it was still just a real struggle. It felt like there was a piece in this process that just wasn't there in the way that I felt like I needed it. And in that model, the answer was just keep doing the steps, keep coming to meetings, keep coming back, kind of thing. But it just felt like, for me at least, it wasn't working. Now, I know for millions of others it does, but for me, it wasn't. At the same time, in these bouts of sobriety, I started seeing the odd counsel here and there, and I started acknowledging, I've got some kind of messed up stuff, like some stuff happened in my childhood that wasn't good. It was definitely kind of feels connected, but I hadn't really quite joined that together. Like I hadn't really seen that this trauma and this addiction are kind of, there's a line between the two that is direct. It's not just like they're loosely connected. I haven't really understood that they were directly connected. And then I came across, in this kind of desperate search for answers, I came across some YouTube videos by Gabor Maté, and I just got really immersed. I then bought his book. I think it's called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And I was reading and listening to him. I had this kind of light bulb moment. But look, I'll let him explain better than me what his understanding is.
All the substances of abuse, whether they're opiates or cocaine or anything else, they're actually painkillers. Some of them specifically are painkillers. But physical pain and emotional pain, the suffering is experienced in the same part of the brain. So when people suffer emotional rejection, the same part of the brain will light up as if you stuck them with a knife. So that all the addictions are attempts to soothe the pain. So when I work with addictions, the first question is always not why the addiction, but why the pain. And what you find is emotional loss or trauma. In the case of the severe addicts, as in the downtown East Side here, they were every single one of them traumatized. There's no women walking the streets here who have not been sexually abused, not even by accident. But you know, whether it's a sex addiction or internet or relationship or shopping or work addiction, these are all attempts to get away from distress. Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guitarist, said, who used to have a severe heroin habit, as you know, he said that all the contortions we go through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. Or why would somebody not want to be themselves? Because they're in too much distress and too much pain. So I don't care what they tell you about genetics or any of that choices or any of that nonsense. It's always about pain. Well, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, it's got a wonderful line in it. Whatever you do, don't try and escape from your pain, but be with it.
So what you can hear in that, and for me it was just like, yeah, it was like a light bulb moment when I came across this, that my addiction was a symptom of my pain. That my addiction was my misguided way of just suppressing my distress, that numbing this pain that I just couldn't deal with. And even on one level, in retrospect, I think, well, that's kind of obvious. It just wasn't to me. I just couldn't make that link. But what it gave me was a framework to say that if I really want to, on a long-term level, deal with my addiction in a way that is sustainable and not easy, but kind of not in a constant sense of struggle, then I needed to be with my pain. So at that point, I sought out a therapist that specialized in sexual trauma and childhood trauma. I started therapy. I started intensive therapy. I was seeing this therapist. I had an amazing therapist that did a second session free with me for 18 months. I was doing 2 sessions a week. I took time off work, which I needed. And I really made this decision that I need to start being present with my pain. So with my therapist, the support of my wife, I had a model now to understand that unless I came to grips with, I was able to be present with, feel compassion for, and understand my pain better, I would relapse. Because what I understood was happening is I would kind of, these periods of sobriety were just periods of like pushing away, and then it would build up and build up and build up and build up, and I could just feel it 2 months, 3 months. At a certain point it would just get too much. I'd be overwhelmed. I just couldn't handle myself. I couldn't be with myself, and then I'd relapse. And yes, it would settle but now I had this other problem that I was back dealing with. It was the addiction and the hiding and the guilt, and I would just go through these cycles. So what I understood from a framework point of view, that if I could be present with that pain, I could be with that pain, have compassion for that pain, learn the different skills and techniques to self-soothe, to self-regulate, and not allow that overwhelming feel to build up and build up, then that triggering effect of relapse, I'd interrupt it. I would break that cycle. And that's exactly what happened. The first year was definitely difficult because from 16 to 40, I'd just always had something to lean on. I'd always had something, at some point when it got too much, I could draw on, whatever that was. And all of a sudden, I'd taken all of that away. And that first year was difficult for sure, but with the right amount of compassion, skill, and insight, and just this understanding that this was the key. this was now my light bulb thing, where if I could really commit myself to that, to stop numbing myself, and to see that I had a right to be with that pain. Some effed up things happened when we were kids. It made sense that I felt that. The pain was so intense for my brother that he literally went psychotic and eventually killed himself. For me, the pain was so intense, I leaned on drugs and alcohol. And I had a right to feel that pain. I had a right to be with that pain. And I gave myself permission to be okay with that, not to deny it. And I can honestly say, I'm 47 now and I started that at 40, that past that first year, it's definitely not been easy, but I feel like I've not struggled. I've not battled. I've not dealt with cravings. I've not dealt with thoughts of relapse. It's just something has softened in me in a way where I feel at peace with it. And I'm very vigilant with it. I'm very conscious that I could slip in a moment on one level, so I'm not blasé or lackadaisical. I meditate every day. I'm still in therapy with the same therapist. I have a program of self-care, but it's working to maintain something rather than get somewhere. It's working to just keep building and expanding that space inside of me to hold that pain. Where I always thought it was about finding that pain and deleting it and getting rid of it and dissolving it, but I've come to understand it's about being with it. That, you know, that pain's probably going to be with me all my life. It's an invisible scar that I just have to make peace with. And as I've made peace with it, it loses a lot of its charge. I still have my moments, but the idea of going back to using, I just don't think about it anymore. And I can honestly say the teachings and writings of Gabor Maté have been a big influence. And there are a lot of people in recovery and healing circles that can say the same about this guy. He's really intelligent, really compassionate, and I felt like when I first came across one of his YouTube videos, I just felt, wow, this guy gets it. This is exactly me. And it's a great thing to feel like you're understood and there's just this missing piece suddenly come together. And if you're in 12-step recovery, to me it's not in conflict. You know, all of this is contained in the one space. You can continue with 12 steps and take this on board. So look, I hope this has helped. I hope this has made sense. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you've got any insights, comments, or you'd like to share your own experiences with addiction, recovery, and childhood trauma, I would love to hear from the comments. I generally try to reply to as many comments as I can. Not that I get that many, but the ones I do, I try to reply to. Thank you very much for coming to my channel. Thank you very much for watching this video in its entirety. Please take care of yourself, and goodbye.